Tonight, hopes that a strike by resident doctors over the festive period can be averted. The Health Secretary makes an offer to the Doctors' Union to address what it calls a jobs crisis. It will now be put to members. Wes Streeting is expected to make a statement in the House of Commons shortly about those negotiations and whether a Christmas of misery in the NHS can be prevented. We'll bring you that live. Also ahead in the next hour, 34 lords and ladies are leaping. The boss of Iceland and Olympic swimmer Sharon Davis among those named in the latest political peerages list. The Deputy Prime Minister tells ministers from across Europe that human rights rules cannot be frozen in time. But is Labour opening a Pandora's box over the ECHR? I'll be speaking to the Justice Minister, Jane Richards. After a mini rebellion by his own MPs yesterday, the Prime Minister comes under pressure in Parliament to consider joining a customs union with the EU. And a social media squeeze after Australia implemented the world's first ban for under-16s. The United States plans to ask tourists for 5 years of their online history before letting them into the country. We'll have that and more debating with our panel tonight, Ranil Jayawardeneh and Liz Saville-Roberts. They'll be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday. I'm Darren McCaffrey, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. A very good evening and welcome to the programme. We're going to begin with that breaking news tonight, and that is that the British Medical Association is to consult its members on whether to call off a pre-Christmas strike by resident doctors after a new offer from the government. In a moment, we'll hear from our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi. But first, let's listen to what the Health Secretary and the BMA have been saying to us this evening.
While I'm frustrated with the BMA, and I think they're playing games now with patients' lives and the lives of other doctors who'll be forced to cover strikes, that doesn't alter the fact that what we've put forward is a good deal for doctors. So I'm going over the head of the BMA now and appealing directly to doctors to work with a government that wants to work with you, to vote for a deal which tackles the jobs crisis that doctors have raised with us in a real and meaningful and urgent way, and would enable us to draw a line under this dispute and start the new year with a fresh start.
I'd like to apologise for any disruption caused, but this was entirely avoidable. We wrote to the Health Secretary on the 19th of November, which was hours after our last industrial action ended. He's had ample opportunity to come to the table and do a deal with us, and instead he waited until 9 o'clock on Sunday morning to present us with an offer. So that was after we announced this round of industrial action. This was entirely avoidable. This is the Health Secretary's timeline, and the timeline is regrettably on the government. We think we've put this offer to members neutrally. We will give the government and NHS England a response well in advance of the industrial action starting, and that is to allow members their say in what's been put forward.
We will return to that in just a moment. I just want to bring you a little bit of breaking news from the United States, from the Federal Reserve, which has cut the interest rate there by 25 base points from 3.75 range down to 3.5%. It had been widely expected that the Fed would cut rates. I'm sure the US President Donald Trump will welcome this news. It comes at a time, of course, in which they're trying to find a new chair for the Federal Reserve to take over next year. But the Fed, they're cutting interest rates in the United States. OK, let's return to that developing story tonight in regards to the doctor's strike and bring in our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi, who's with me in the studio. Good evening to you. I suppose, Ashish, my first question is, just remind us what the BMA are actually looking for here and what the government are willing to compromise on.
The BMA want money. They want pay restoration back to previous levels. They say they need another 28%, I think it is. They describe it as an uplift. They had 29% when the Health Secretary took up his post when Labour swept into power. The first thing he did was try and resolve the doctor strikes, and he did that to some degree. The 2 years of industrial action we'd seen under 5 previous Tory health secretaries just went on and on, no resolution in sight. He came in and he sat down with the Junior Doctors Committee, resolved those strikes, and then they came back and said, look, you know, it's great that we've had some movement on this, but actually, if you look at it, We're still years behind what we should be behind, and we want more money. And at the time of the strikes 2 years ago, I think there was a lot of public sympathy for junior doctors as they were known then, resident doctors as they are known now. But certainly, I think there was an acceptance from the public that there is a squeeze on the public sector purse, there wasn't any more money left, and that as far as workers were concerned, that they'd had the biggest uplift. It didn't bring them back to the pay restoration that they were looking for. The other thing they wanted is what they are now going back to their membership to discuss, and this is jobs for English-trained medics. Essentially, that's what it boils down to. This isn't the creation of thousands of new jobs. This is the repurposing of existing jobs, training schemes, to try and make sure that the young graduate doctors who come through the system will have a job at the end of it. And that's something they've also wanted at the same time as the money, but the money isn't there.
But what is interesting is where public opinion might be on all of this, which I'm sure the BMA are aware of. You and I talked about this last week. We know we're going into a very, very difficult flu season.
Yes.
And the BMA must be aware that if they go on strike, it's not going to go down terribly well.
I think they are too far down that route already. If they've lost public opinion, so what? They want pay restoration, and they feel it's deserved. They feel they train hard, they work hard, and as doctors, they should be paid fairly. And they listen. When you listen to those interviews today, Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, he sounds optimistic. He's hoping that the door has been pushed open, that negotiations can continue, and that the strikes penciled in, as you said, for next week on the 17th. They're due to walk out just before Christmas, with flu season about to peak. It's disastrous for NHS Trust to have to deal with resident doctors on strike, flu season, and all the other things that happen over the Christmas and winter period. But when you listen to what Dr. Jack Fletcher had to say, he doesn't sound as optimistic. He said, we're going to take this and show it to our membership, and if they think we want to consider it, this is in 2 stages. Let's look at it. 2 stages. So the first stage is they will decide whether they want to consider this offer. If they want to consider this offer, the strikes that are due to take place next week will be paused.
OK.
Right? And then they will consider in the longer term whether the industrial action goes ahead or not.
OK, Oshie, stay with us, because as we said at the top of the program, we are expecting to hear from Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, in a moment. But let's bring in our duo for this evening, former Conservative Minister Sir Renil Jayawardena and the Plaid Cymru Westminster leader, Liz Saville-Roberts. A very good evening to you both. First of all, Liz, are you happy with the prospect that actually these strikes might be called off?
Well, of course, you know, I'm a representative of Plaid Cymru. I'm from Wales. Health is devolved. We are in a different situation when it comes to resident doctors in Wales. There were strikes last year, but there are not strikes in prospect being proposed for next week or any time that I know of in Wales. There are problems with the health service in Wales, but I think one of the key questions here, and there are 2 issues with recruitment. On the one hand, we train so many medics and they then go abroad. One of the reasons why they go abroad is because they are paid better when they are abroad. And on the other hand, I also hear complaints of people who have trained in England. I certainly hear of this in Wales. People who have trained, we've been telling them that we desperately need doctors. We know that we desperately need doctors, and there are no jobs for them. That really is a disaster. So home trained, the cost has gone in, the public expense has gone to train them in universities here in the United Kingdom. We need to be able to find jobs for them here.
Well, look, clearly it's great news if the strikes can be called off, because fundamentally this is about people, it's about patients, it's about real lives, and so that's got to be the guiding priority. But what is really worrying and disappointing is that Labour came in and one of the first actions was to simply dole out taxpayers' money on massive pay rises.
Well,
junior doctors got
came in to stop strike action that was crippling the national health.
So this is the problem, right? So they gave all this money away very early on, and now, knowing that that's the way Labour operate, the unions are coming back for more. And that's really concerning, because where does this end? They could say in 6 months' time again they want more money. They've got the opportunity to hold this government to ransom because of the way the government has demonstrated they're willing to act.
I mean, forgive me, but I think that's rather a Tory narrative in relation to unions. We need doctors to remain in post, we need doctors to know their patients, to know the organisations, the hospitals in which they work. If we can't take this, and as I was saying earlier, we're losing doctors to Ireland, we're losing doctors to other countries. If they are paid more elsewhere, they are not going to stay here. if we just get tied up into this conventional narrative of the unions will always ask for more, then actually we are not going to deal with the crisis that we have in the National Health Service.
Well, objectively, they have continued to ask for more. But on the point around people leaving the country, I actually agree with you on this. This is a big challenge, and I do think that perhaps we should have done more, and certainly the current government should do more on making sure there is a deal done with people who study medicine in this country to say, look, in return for the public commitment that we are giving you to study medicine, to then learn your trade here in the UK, you should have to practice medicine in this country for at least a set period of years, rather than disappearing off to Australia or where else.
You prefer essentially a stick rather than a carrot?
You're putting words in my mouth.
Okay. Just what's the mood inside the BMA? What's your impression of what's likely to play out? I mean, it seems, am I going too far? Are you suggesting that they will at least accept to consult on this?
The fact that the committee have now taken this offer and are putting it to their membership is in itself a positive step forward. But they will not be drawn in any more than that. They can't, because now it goes to a membership. They can try and gauge how their members are feeling, but suddenly if their members are thinking, we've been in this too long, we've wanted more money, we haven't got more money, jobs, great, really great thing that the government is making more jobs available, but we haven't got what we've wanted, and that is more money. They could easily turn around and reject this offer. So I don't think the BMA membership will say anything, but the fact that they are taking this offer, don't forget, negotiations go on all the time, right? The government representatives are meeting BMA representatives, and they are talking all the time. This is the first time that we've had any movement on this. So the fact that they've taken this off and thought, actually, this isn't a bad place to start. Let's take this to our membership. And now it's up to the membership to look at that and vote on it.
Let's just on the wider prospect of strikes in the run-up to Christmas at a time in which, we are looking at a massive increase in people being hospitalised because of flu. And I get, this is a long-running issue and there are genuine grievances here over pay, but that's a terrible place for a doctor to be in, to go on strike, to potentially put lives at risk, isn't it?
Of course it is. I mean, it's really worrying. The state of the National Health Service is really worrying. I'm looking at it from the point of view of Wales.
No doctor should really do that, should they?
But at the same time, if doctors are finding themselves in a position where they cannot carry on, where the workloads are so hard, where you've got the turnover in staff retention, where the quality of service that they are professionally expecting to require is just not possible because of the organisational failures and weaknesses they find themselves in, then how long do they hold on for? Yes, I agree with you entirely over Christmas. It really worries me because we've had a bad flu season already prior to Christmas. Families will be coming together. But if we carry on trying to just patch up what is unsustainable, then where is that decision going to be made? The government, we have a long-term history of just not dealing with public...
The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, is now making a statement in the Commons on this.
Including the official opposition for facilitating this evening's statement. With your permission, I will make a statement on industrial action by resident doctors. As we head into winter, our hospitals are running hot and the pressures on the NHS are enormous. Flu season has come earlier with a sharp rise in cases. The peak still to come, and this year's strain more likely to affect older people more severely. Already, the number of patients in hospital in England with flu is the highest on record at this point in the year. It is 50% higher than this time last year and 10 times higher than in 2023. 95% of hospital beds are occupied, growing numbers of staff are off sick, and we are already seeing the pressure in our A&E departments. It is against this backdrop that the BMA is threatening to douse the NHS in petrol, light a match, and march its members out on strike. This represents a different magnitude of risk to previous industrial action. The BMA Resident Doctors Committee is in dispute on two issues, pay and jobs. On pay, resident doctors have already received a 28.9% pay rise, the highest in the public sector. For a first-year resident doctor, that is the equivalent of a £9,400 pay rise. I have been consistent, honest and upfront with resident doctors, but we cannot go further on pay this year. There is a gap between what the BMA is demanding and what the country can afford. Nor would further movement on pay be fair to other NHS staff, for whom I am also responsible, and many of whom will never in their careers earn as much as the lowest paid doctor. As I've made clear to the BMA and other trade unions, I am open to discussing multi-year pay deals with any trade union if we stand a chance of bridging the gap between affordability and expectations. On jobs, I have much more sympathy with the BMA's demands. I have heard the very real fears resident doctors across the country have about their futures. It is a legitimate grievance that I agree with. My Conservative predecessors created training bottlenecks that threatened to leave huge numbers of resident doctors without a job. In 2019, there were around 12,000 applicants for 9,000 specialty training places. This year, that has soared to nearly 40,000 applicants for 10,000 places. Now, it used to be the case that UK graduates competed among themselves for specialty roles. Now they are competing against the world's doctors. That is a direct result of the visa and immigration changes made by the previous Conservative government post-Brexit. And it is compounded by the Conservatives' decision to increase the number of medical students without also increasing the number of specialty training places. Taxpayers spend £4 billion training medics every year. We then treat them poorly, and some leave to work abroad or in the private sector. So it's time we protect our investment and give bright, hard-working UK medical graduates a path to become the next generation of NHS doctors. Our 10-year plan for health set out our commitment to provide that path. It pledged to introduce 1,000 extra specialty training places and prioritisation of medical graduates from the UK and Ireland. Today, in an offer to resident doctors, I can announce that I am able to go further. I want to thank Sir Jim Mackey, the Chief Executive of the NHS, and his team, who have been going trust by trust to see how many extra places can be funded and are needed. Thanks to their hard work, I am in a position today to be able to offer 4,000 specialty places for resident doctors, starting with an additional 1,000 for those applying this year. In the Department of Health and Social Care, we've been working intensively on UK graduate prioritisation. The barriers have been legal ones, so I've been working intensively with my team to see how quickly we could introduce legislation. Thanks to their efforts, the cooperation of colleagues across government and my counterparts in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, I can notify the House tonight that, subject to resident doctors' agreement, we intend to introduce urgent primary legislation in the form of a bill to be presented to Parliament in the new year. This will prioritise graduates from UK medical schools over applicants from overseas during the current application round and in all subsequent years. The reforms will also prioritise doctors who have worked in the NHS for a significant period for specialty training. This will not exclude international talent, who will still be able to apply to roles and continue to bring new and vital skills to our NHS. But it will return us to the fair terms on which homegrown medics competed before Brexit. The impact of these changes is that instead of 4 doctors competing for every training post, it will now be fewer than 2 doctors for every place. That is a good deal for doctors. Following discussions with the BMA, we are also addressing the specific costs faced by resident doctors which do not apply to other NHS staff. So while I cannot go further on pay this year, I am able to offer today to put money back in resident doctors' pockets by reimbursing Royal College portfolio, membership and exam fees, with the latter backdated to April. The allowance for less than full-time resident doctors, many of whom are parents and carers, will be increased by 50% to £1,500 helping to close the gender pay gap. So in recent days, I formally made this offer to the BMA Resident Doctors Committee. The BMA will now survey its members in the coming days on whether to accept this offer and end its dispute with the government. The BMA told us that they will survey their members quickly and give us less than 48 hours' notice on whether the strikes are going ahead. Madam Deputy Speaker, that presents serious operational challenges for NHS leaders who need certainty now as to whether they are cancelling patient appointments and cancelling staff annual leave to cover strikes. So in my determination to prevent the havoc that strikes would cause this Christmas, I therefore made one more offer to the BMA, which I will share with the House, the country and frontline doctors now. So that the BMA could run a genuine ballot of its members and call off next week's strikes while that ballot ran, I offered to extend their strike mandate. This would have allowed enough time for the BMA to reschedule next week's strikes for the end of January, were the offer to resident doctors rejected in a ballot. It would have avoided the chaos that looming strike action threatens at the most dangerous time of year by removing the spectre of strikes next week. I also knew that extending the BMA strike mandate would leave me open to attack from political opponents. It was a risk I was willing to take to stop the Christmas strikes going ahead. Madam Deputy Speaker, I must report to the House that the BMA's leadership said no. In the coming days, as the NHS prepares for strike action, which may or may not happen, there are patients whose operations will be cancelled. There are NHS staff who will have to tell their families that they won't be home for Christmas because they have to cover for resident doctor colleagues. And this was entirely avoidable. No one should be in any doubt that the BMA has chosen to play politics with people's lives this Christmas and to continue holding the spectre of strikes over the NHS. I ask resident doctors to bear that in mind when they cast their votes. Madam Deputy...
There we go. That is Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, speaking in the Commons. Clearly quite frustrated there that officially the strikes have not been called off, while accepting that the fears about the future of resident doctors are legitimate, and having put forward a proposal to prioritise essentially British doctors, if you like. He is also suggesting that because the strikes have not yet officially been called off, that they are playing games with patients' lives and also potentially disrupting people's Christmases when it may not be necessary. We'll keep across, of course, what's happening in the Commons throughout the evening here on Sky News, and that is almost certainly going to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us tonight will be the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. That's at 10:30 tonight here on Sky News. Now, let's turn to another developing story this evening. That is new nominations to the House of Lords. They have been announced, and the man in the know is our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who has literally been going through the list with a highlighter pen, trying to discover who's interesting and who's not. John, who's on the list?
The total number is 34. The numbers are interesting because Labour have got 25, Liberal Democrats 5, although 2 of those are ex-hereditary peers. Tories only 3, and they're not happy about that. They think it's outrageous that the Lib Dems have got more than them. So let's look at some of the names. There's an eye-catching name, actually, amongst the Tories, the 3 Tories. Sharon Davis, the Olympic swimmer, silver medalist at the Olympics, big campaigner on gender and trans issues, spoke at the Tory conference last year, pretty outspoken campaigner on that, clearly got Kemi Badenoch's backing. Simon Heffer, journalist. John Redwood, veteran Tory ex-MP, MP for Wokingham, he goes to the Lords. Now,
man, of course, who challenged for the Conservative leadership.
1995, yes. Lib Dems, quickly look at those, couple of hereditaries. Sarah Tether is a name, most people will know, used to be an MP in Brent, a seat once held by...
I think most people might be a bit of a stretch, but people who watch this programme, John, I would say.
She was a minister of the coalition government. OK. All right, let's get on to the Labour ones, because the Labour list is the big list. One of the people, actually, who's not that well known, but I don't know if we've got pictures of it, Carol Linforth. Do you remember the 2023 Labour Party conference when some protester threw a lot of glitter all over Keir Starmer's suit?
Here we go.
The lady who wiped it all off, brushed it off, is about to appear on the left of the screen. I think... No, there she is, there she is. A Labour Party staff member took his jacket, came to his rescue. She's got a peerage for that.
I was going to say, I don't want to be too... I hope it's for a little bit more than that.
No doubt other duties as well. Big business figure, the one big business figure, you could say controversial, Richard Walker, boss of Iceland Foods. Now, he was a would-be Tory MP, you'll remember this, wanted to be a Tory, and then in 2023 said the Tories were out of touch and was going to back Labour. Anyway, he's got a peerage. Spin doctors, well, Matthew Doyle, there's a few spin doctors, actually. Matthew Doyle, an old an ally, if you like, of going back to Alistair Campbell's time and Tony Blair. He was Director of Communications. He's got a peerage. Catherine MacLeod, former political journalist, worked for Alistair Darling, peerage. Katie Martin, until recently, was Rachel Reeves' chief of staff. She's got a peerage as well. There are 5 figures from local government in London, none from outside London.
So it's quite an extensive list, and you say very heavily towards Labour.
Well, the Labour Party says that for even with these appointments, Tories will still be the biggest party by far in the Lords.
And still no cross-bench peerage for you, John Craig. Are you disappointed?
There is one for somebody called Charles Kinnell, who's a former hereditary.
Okay.
This is Keir plotting the end of the peer show for the Tories.
Oh, there we go. Now, you are a knight of the realm, but not a peer. What do you think of the fact that Labour seem to have nominated quite a lot of Labour nominees and very few Conservatives?
Well, first of all, I think there's a bit of hypocrisy here. You know, when they were in opposition, they criticised us for making new peerages and said that the House of Lords was getting too big. And then look what they're doing now. You know, 25 new peers being created for many people who are so close personally to the leadership. And again, they criticised us for that.
What you're trying to say is you're all bad as each other.
No, what I'm saying is that they're not going by. They're not going by what they said that they would do in government. So they promised one thing to the country and they're doing another. And then, yes, on the numbers, I mean, it does seem that if they are trying to be fair and balanced and proportionate, then at least the Conservatives would have the same number as the Liberal Democrats, if not more. So to award Conservatives only 3 seems a bit unbalanced, given the proportionality in the House of Commons.
Liz, I always think it's very easy to kind of slate the House of Lords. It is easy. I mean, there are 800 of them, so it is quite big. But, for example, they are properly scrutinising this employment bill that's going through. I mean, they do have a function in our democracy.
But they have a function in our democracy. Plaid Cymru believes it should be an entirely elected second chamber. And as it stands, we are seeing, just as you mentioned, that there are people from local government from London being rushed in some way or other to improve Labour's position. That's one of our issues with this. I mean, again, if it represents the 4 nations of the United Kingdom, that degree of representation seems to be sadly missing once again with these additional promotions, now appointments to the House of Lords. But as you said, in all honesty, they're both as bad as each other. I mean, Labour were talking in their manifesto that they would fundamentally reform. They were talking about getting rid of hereditary peers. That hasn't entirely happened in the way it was expected. They have broken their manifesto promise, and they're now stuffing it full of people of their own inclination to make sure they can get their own legislation.
And their argument is they want to rebalance it. But what is fascinating is I think the Lib Dems have nominated 2 peers that used to be hereditary peers, become life peers. John, we've run out of time. But we will campaign for you to be on the next list, I promise. For the moment, John Craig, only John Craig, thank you very much indeed. OK, you're watching The Politics Hub here on Sky News. Coming up after the break, the Deputy PM says that human rights rules cannot be frozen in time as he's met with European ministers. But is Labour at risk of opening the floodgates when it comes to reforms of the ECHR? We'll be discussing that up next. You're watching the Politics Hub. Now, European ministers, including the Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy, have been meeting in Strasbourg today to discuss a potential shake-up of the European Convention on Human Rights. In a joint statement to the Council of Europe, 27 member states call for reforms to address what they call today's challenges. It's all part of attempts to tackle illegal migration and take a tougher approach in policing the continent's borders. But it's not without risk for the government, facing Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage, who both want to leave the ECHR completely. Well, let's get more on this with our political correspondent, Mara Aurora, who's with me in the studio. And you're going to take us through, if you can, the kind of two bits that the government, and to be fair, other governments, want to see change inside the ECHR.
Exactly. So there are two areas really of contention within the ECHR, Article 3 and Article 8. And these are the areas that people feel are potentially being exploited or essentially blocking people being to be deported, for instance, foreign criminals and those kinds of people. So Article 3, here we are. Prohibition of torture. No one should be subjected to torture or to inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. So clearly that is a human right in the ECHR. The difficulty is that right-wing parties like the Conservatives and Reform have essentially said that this has been exaggerated or exploited, where people say to themselves, if I were to go back, there's a chance that I could be tortured by
I think there's even been a case where someone suggested the prison cell that we put back into is smaller than the ones here, and that, in essence, would be degrading.
Exactly. So there have been instances that have frustrated not just right-wing parties, but also even the Labour government have admitted that in some areas this has been unacceptable or perhaps over-egged. And so they're wanting to perhaps try and tighten some of this stuff up. And the second article that is the most contentious is Article 8. So Article 8 is all about the right to respect for private and family life. Everyone has the right to respect for his private and family life, his home and his correspondence. Now, Article 8 has also been seen as very controversial because you hear often the Conservatives talk about chicken nugget gate. For instance, it's an example of a case where somebody's child and the chicken nuggets that they liked or didn't like to eat, they used that in the case. Now, it was a much more complicated case than that. The Tories don't like to go into the detail. But this is another article that is often weaponised by right-wing parties to say that the ECHR is not for purpose.
Also, the extent of kind of the family, you know,
Exactly.
the family can be very different things to a lot of different people.
Exactly. Are we talking immediate family, parents and children? Are we talking sisters and brothers, aunts and uncles, etc.? And so that's also been a level of frustration, created a level of frustration in government. And so Labour are saying that they are ready and willing to modernise and reform the ECHR. Now, it might be not the first time we've heard of this, but really Keir Starmer is trying to show that he has the political appetite and the will to really go further and try and get some of these member states to agree to actually try and tweak the ECHR. The difficulty is, of course, 27 of those states have signed this declaration so far. However, there are 46 in total, so still a long way to go to persuade everyone to get around the table and actually back some of these possible reforms.
And even then, it's up to the judges to take this political statement into account when they make a judgment, so it's not necessarily fundamental change.
Exactly, which is why right-wing parties say, this is never going to work, just scrap it all together.
OK, all right. As always, thank you very much indeed. Well, a little earlier, I had the chance to speak to the Justice Minister, Jake Richards. Have a look at this. Very good evening. Thank you for joining us. I suppose the first question is this Labour now finally admitting that there is a problem with the ECHR?
Well, there's a need for the ECHR to modernise. It's a living instrument that is in the ECHR itself, and it must evolve with the times. And clearly, in the 21st century, the UK, like many countries across Europe, is facing a real challenge around mass illegal migration. And where the ECHR needs to evolve to meet those challenges, then it should. And today is a really positive step forward in that agenda, and the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister deserve credit in getting to this position.
When did the government realise there was a problem with the ECHR?
Well, actually, the former Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has been talking about the reforms we need to do around Article 8 domestically since just after the general election, and those plans are coming to fruition in the current Home Secretary's statement just a few weeks ago.
18 months. to get to this stage? Well, I mean, which, by the way, is not even very far.
Well, two responses to that. Firstly, the changes we're going to be making in Article 8 will have to need primary legislation. That does take time. This is complex. We've got to get it right. And Shabana Mahmood has set out what we're going to do that, and we'll do that at some pace. In terms of our international agreements, well, there's 46 countries that have signed up to the intention around a political declaration. That does take some work. That does take some time. Only a few months ago, there was only 9 countries that were even part of this agenda. And I think the UK have played a really important role in bringing this forward.
How many migrants, by the way, if you do get this reform through, and it is a big if, have you worked out how many migrants you'd be able to deport, extra migrants, if you get this through?
Well, again, it's a bit more complex than that, if I may. So on Article 8, let me just deal with Article 8, which is about family life and private life. It's quite clear that we've seen, and there are statistics to show this, that is being used in the appeal process within our immigration tribunal system disproportionately, and we need to crack down on that. Now, that actually doesn't need international agreement. We can do that in our domestic law, and that's what the Home Secretary is doing. In regards to Article 3, which is about deporting foreign national offenders, we are talking about quite small numbers. But there are cases which, in the government's view, undermine the faith in our criminal justice system and our international obligations, and therefore we do need to look for changes, and that's what we're doing.
But you don't know how many extra migrants if you get the changes through, how many will be sent back? Because that kind of gets to the nub of what you're trying to achieve here, isn't it?
Well, there's two things. There's one, it's less just about deporting people who shouldn't be here, although that is important, but it's also about the regimes that we have in terms of the pull factors that might try and get people to come here, be able to stay here, and sometimes it's about quickening and hastening up the deportation process. And some of the Article 8 claims we've seen in our immigration system have done that successfully, and we need to crack down on it.
How long is this going to take?
Well, we're hoping that we'll get the political declaration in May of next year. And that's what the intention from 46 countries across Europe have signed the statement today, making that intention clear.
So does the political declaration mean that the ECHR then has been reformed, or do you have to go even further?
No, that would be a very significant moment. And Joshua Rosenberg, the legal academic, has talked about this as being a significant moment whereby the European Court of Human Rights would then take into account the European consensus on this issue. And the UK have played a leading part in this.
So it's not fundamental change, it's them taking into account the view of the member states, effectively.
It's modernising the way we interpret our laws. Now, that's fundamental to how laws work, and including the ECHR. OK, I think 27 Council of Europe states have so far kind of pressed for this change, so just over half. What happens if you don't get this? What if, and there are people who don't want it, not least of all inside the court itself, what happens then? Well, first of all, don't accept that last point. I met with the President of the Court just a few weeks ago, and he's very clear that the Court takes into account what democratically elected governments are saying about the jurisprudence and about the social, political and economic issues we face in Europe. That's right. That's what courts always do. So I don't accept the last point. In terms of the 27 countries, they have begun in the statement and the political statement that the UK has signed to set the direction of travel over the next 5-6 months. And that has to be a focus on Article 3 reform and Article 8 reform. And so, that's what that statement does, but we have complete consensus about the need to do something, and that's a good start.
But the bottom line is you're not prepared to leave, are you?
No, there is absolutely no case for leaving the ECHR.
There's no case. So if you don't reform, if you can't get... It's possible, of course it's possible, that you don't get this. This just simply doesn't happen. So we just stay in the status quo.
No, because this is a classic example whereby it's either leave, shut up and go, or we try and work with our international partners, work with international organisations to deliver change that delivers on people's priorities. Now, reform and the Conservatives chasing reform's tail say, let's rip this all up. By the way, that would affect our Good Friday Agreement. It would affect our trade deals. It would affect our returns agreement with France on illegal migration. It would undermine a lot of the good work that this government and other governments have done over the last 20 or 30 years.
There's no point in identifying a problem, having a negotiation about it, and then saying, well, if we don't get what we want, we're just going to stick with the status quo.
The fundamental difference...
That's definitely not where the British public are.
The fundamental difference, and that's the normal dynamic of a negotiation, the fundamental difference is everyone is on the same hymn sheet here. Every single country in the Council of Europe is facing pressures because of illegal migration, whether they are small pressures, large pressures. perhaps different types of pressures, but we're all facing those issues. And that's what this
not
political
all in
statement is
agreement.
about.
They're not all in agreement about what to do about this. My point
Well, I'm
is...
sorry, no, I have to press you on that. 46 of them have signed this document today.
All I would say is you don't know how many migrants it's going to send home. You don't really know how long this process is going to take, and you're not prepared to leave the institution. We could well be here in a year's time, in another 18 months' time, and you've been in power for 18 months, where nothing has changed.
Well, I don't accept that that's going to happen, because today we've had a...
Well, you haven't demonstrated anything different to date.
Well, today we've announced a consensus across all 46 countries who are members of the Council of Europe about an intention to take this work stream forward and announce a political declaration in May. That's a big achievement, a big moment. Yeah, that's not me saying it, that's legal academics, others saying it as well.
You know what else was a big achievement, apparently, was this one-in, one-out deal with France. How many migrants have been sent home with that?
Well, that's at the moment.
No, that was lauded by the government.
Yes.
It's a massive move, a significant thing. There's going to be a game changer. Well, how many migrants have been sent home?
I mean, it wasn't just us that were lauding it. I remember Robert Jenrick, when he was immigration minister, saying that we need to get a deal with France.
You're now in government.
We've got that deal. We need to expand it. It needs to grow over time. The Home Secretary has set out her intention to expand that deal, and other incredibly radical but important measures in terms of deporting people who shouldn't be here, but absolutely critically trying to get rid of any pull factors that bring people here in the first place. Now, that's a work in progress. We've got to do better, but this is an important part of that agenda.
None of these things are that radical. People do want to see radical action taken. I mean, that's reflected in the frustration we're seeing in the polls. It's reflected in the support for reform. And this Labour government seems absolutely wedded to incremental change that is taking ages. And, by the way, in the end, may not work.
Well, there's two things. Look, I think people are frustrated about a lack of progress in terms of immigration, but what they do not want is gimmicks that don't work, because they've had that before. We had that for 14 years. The Conservatives, gimmick after gimmick after gimmick,
the one-in, one-out deal is a bit of a gimmick. It's a couple of hundred people.
What this government is doing is actually serious efforts on a European scale to tackle the root cause of the problem. Now, we've got a long way to go. I'm not for a minute sitting here saying we should all celebrate this achievement today because we solved the problem. Absolutely not. This is one piece in a puzzle which is trying to tackle the root causes of illegal migration coming to this country, and I believe we will deliver on that.
OK, just before I let you go, I just want to ask you one other question, which in relation to, I'm sure you saw yesterday, that interim report looking at the horrendous treatment of women in the NHS, particularly those giving birth. You've got a daughter, and your reflection on that, because I bring this up, we've had a lot of viewers get in touch for the last 24 hours saying this is the treatment that they've experienced, quite similar treatments. And again, there's, I think, a sense of frustration, the government needs to take action now, not wait for yet another report to conclude in months and months' time. What reassurance can you give to women, to parents up and down the country that the government really is going to change the experience for thousands, tens of thousands of women using the NHS?
Well, look, from my perspective, you mentioned it, I've got a young family myself. I take these issues very seriously from a constituency basis, because I've had constituents get in contact with me with not dissimilar accounts to those that I'm sure they've sent into this TV channel. Look, I have full faith that Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, grasps the seriousness of this issue, and I think you'll be seeing action at haste. I understand the urgency on it, and I understand people thinking that action needs to be taken now. I've got confidence that Wes Streeting will take that action.
OK, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was the Justice Minister, Jake Richards, speaking to me a little earlier. Let's bring back in our panel tonight. And let's be fair to him. He made a pretty good case for the government trying to build political consensus in Europe to transform something that you want to see happen, to transform the ECHR.
Well, look, credit where credit's due. They've woken up to smell the coffee that the ECHR is not working. The trouble is that this is, I'm afraid to say, a bit of window dressing, because what they're trying to do by having this political statement, by trying to persuade the countries to try and push the judges to interpret the law in one direction, is not fundamentally changing the European Convention itself. And they have accepted that to rewrite the ECHR itself, rather than just do this window dressing and change the interpretation of the rules, to change the ECHR itself, they've accepted will take many, many years. That won't be done under this government.
Yeah, but it's not simply window dressing. It's a little too far, isn't it? Because ultimately the court has admitted it does take in, these political statements do matter when it comes to its judgments.
We would hope so. But, you know, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and until that is tested, who knows? But fundamentally, unless the ECHR is totally rewritten, there will always be the risk that states cannot do what they're democratically entitled to do. And, the British government should be able to deport illegal migrants who have committed heinous crimes in this country. The British public would expect that, rather than having paedophiles kept in this country because their rights might be affected in a foreign country.
And isn't that the point, I suppose, Liz, that there are examples where, this court is being abused, essentially, by people and maybe even lawyers to subvert some of the decisions the government want to make around immigration?
Well, lawyers were always going to push interpretations of law, but let's just take a step back. Today is International Human Rights Day, by the way, and the ECHR has been with us for nigh on 75 years. The United Kingdom was the first signatory to the convention, and if we are now going to throw those values out in a review, that is something that we need to take immensely seriously. Having said that, of course, in law, everything is reviewed up to a point as we move ahead. 75 years is a long time. But those values mattered then and they matter now. And I think the message for politicians possibly and for the government here is that we look at Denmark. Denmark has been pandering to the far right. Yeah. It hasn't done them politically any favours.
Well, hold on. Sorry, you can say pandering to the far right, but they've also... This is an elected government in Denmark carrying out the elected will of the public. And at the end of the day, if the UK government want to do something, and of course preventing it, and it's what the public want, surely in a democracy that also has to at least be taken into account.
But the government is also in charge of the narrative that they convey to the public. If we start taking away basic human rights, that may be fine under this government here, but those rights are taken away into the future and they may be interpreted in an entirely different way. That is why sometimes judges have to stand in the face of making what can be presented politically as being very unpopular arguments, making very unpopular decisions. But if they don't, we need to look to the future with great care.
Just very briefly.
I'm afraid that's exactly the problem. Judges are there to enforce the law as decided by Parliament. Parliament and government should decide these things representing the will of the people.
OK, well, we're not going to, unfortunately, reach a decision.
The law cuts both ways, and the judges are the only buffer we have.
OK, right, we're going to leave that there because it is definitely an issue we're going to come back to on this programme, I suspect, in the months and months to come. OK, you're watching the Politics Hub here on Sky News. Taking one last break. Up next, we're talking about social media facing a squeeze across the world, with under-16s in Australia now being banned from using it, and apparently tourists heading to the US facing an inspection of what's on their phone. We'll explain it all and debating after the break.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, hopes that a strike by resident doctors over the festive period can be averted. This is after a new offer from the government. Also ahead, Downing Street releasing its latest list of political peerages. We'll speak to former Olympic swimmer Sharon Davies, who has been nominated by the Conservatives. And tributes to the best-selling author Sophie Kinsella, who has died at the age of 55. We'll speak to her close friend and fellow novelist Jojo Moyes. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island. The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force. It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, over in Australia, children under the age of 16 have had their first day without social media after the country ban came into force. Well, the Culture Secretary here, Lisa Nandy, told Sky News earlier that the government will be keeping a very close eye on the move and see how it plays out.
On the separate question of whether we ban young people from using social media, there are also concerns that taking that sort of approach will push young people to other places and spaces. And what we heard most of all from young girls who took part in this State of the Nation report was that they were concerned that if boys in particular couldn't see that there was a problem with behaviours online, they wouldn't be able to see that there was a problem with those behaviours in the real world. What they asked for, above all else, was adults who they could trust, who they could go to and turn to, who had the information, the skills that they needed to be able to help young people to navigate this online world.
Well, social media is not just in the news here or indeed in Australia, but also across the pond as well. Dozens of tourists from, I'll say that again. Dozens of countries with their tourists, including the UK, could be asked to provide a 5-year social media history as a condition of entry to the US. I suspect it'll be more than a couple of dozen people. Though I was joking earlier that given my prolific nature of social media, I might spend hours at the border as they scroll through. This is quite extraordinary in the sense that, you know, whether you're a kid or now an adult, social media is determining lots of your life.
Of course, because now, and for many of us when we were younger, this wasn't the case, everything you put on social media has the potential to last forever. I really welcome what Australia are doing. It gives us a chance to learn from the effect of that. But I think, you know, we on the one hand, we recognise that social media exists. To deny it is just to deny reality. But we've also got to look at the effect it has on children's mental health, quite possibly on their physical health as well. And just to actually recognise that the social media companies, they are not interested in people's well-being. They are effectively predating on people. And when they are predating on children, we need to be very, very careful about how we enable that.
I think Albert Albanese was suggesting that, you know, kids pick up a book or go out and play and see their family and friends in person rather than online. In saying that, I mean, are you happy with banning things? It seems a very unconservative thing to do in some regards.
Well, it's an unlibertarian thing to do, but I'm a conservative, and I've long supported, in fact, not just banning social media, but banning smartphones in schools. And I called for that whilst I was in Parliament, so I'm being super consistent, but also I'm volunteering right now as a school governor, and I'm delighted that we've banned all phones in the school that I'm a school governor of, because that will mean that pupils are no longer under the pressure to keep up with one another, also to the distraction potentially of using a phone covertly, and actually it's much better for their own development.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument about whether kind of education would be better. I mean, there's ways around these things, and I think we've already seen the download of certain apps in Australia kind of peak. Just briefly on America, though, I mean, it's meant to be the land of the free speech.
And it makes you wonder, I don't know whether I would be let in now, but it also makes you wonder if they're just who's going to be targeted by this as well? Because I find it difficult to imagine that everybody who goes through the gates is going to get hauled up. That's going to be interesting to watch.
Have you slagged off Donald Trump on Twitter?
I'm sure I've said something as a politician that will either direct me to South America or Canada.
Just very briefly on this, I mean, it does seem a bit un-American, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure that this is the thing that they should be, you know, focusing on in terms of controlling their borders. I think it's perfectly right for any country to want to control its borders. I think we should do a better job of that here. But to use social media as the test, that doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem appropriate. I don't think it will achieve what they want.
Well, you know what? We've had a lot of free speech on the programme tonight, and that will continue. Thank you very much indeed for joining us both here on the Politics Hub, because we have run out of time. We'll be back, of course, tomorrow at 7. Do join me then, if you can. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J and me. Stay tuned for that, and I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you.
So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think? It's really unusual. Mornings with Richard and Frost.
Let's crack on. Let's get started.